China 2019. In a world where geopolitical tensions ebb and flow, how China and Australia relate and interact when it comes to trade has never been more critical. We ask whether there's a way to bridge differences when they arise, specifically what can be achieved through cultural exchange and sports diplomacy.
There's likely to always be challenges between the Australia to China trade relationship. The value sets can be quite different between the two countries, and obviously you've got, from a defence point of view, got a very American-centric policy here in Australia. From a trade point of view, China obviously dominates, and the two don't always go hand in hand.
I've got to say Australian politicians are a bit naive in understanding the power of words in a relationship with China, that words in Australia can often be said in jest or lightheartedly or in a belief that they won't be taken seriously. From a Chinese cultural perspective, it's almost completely the opposite. Your words, your bond.
We're here in Sydney, Australia, to talk to David Koch, President of the South Australian Football Club, Port Adelaide. We asked him for his perspective on sport as a bridge between Australia and China.
Basically, I thought it's our biggest trading partner, it's our biggest source of foreign tourists. Why can't a sporting organisation like ours be an exporter into China, but exporting sport and high-performance facilities and also trying to build links between China and Australia. Very tongue-in-cheek. If you know, Port Adelaide is very working class. I often say that Port Adelaide is to Australia like the Bolshoi is to Russia. That we're in the business of building friendship and links rather than through culture, through sport, which is part of our DNA. So that's really how it started.
It is a quirky national sporting code, but to see the Chinese fans watching it and to have commentary in Mandarin was absolutely golden. So it was a great opportunity for strengthening of the bilateral relationship.
Our objective is simply to use sport as a cultural bridge between Australian and Chinese business. Our message has been to Chinese business owners, if you want to build a bridge and understand each other through football, Port Adelaide is China's AFL club.
Sport is a huge part in the diplomacy between Australia and China, because sport can be a real connector. And it's not just about feeling good about our two countries because we're watching a game of footy together. There are real business-to-business opportunities surrounding the game itself, which is why the AFL game in 2017 coincided with Australia Week in China.
For the corporate sponsors of Port Adelaide, among them Shanghai Cred, the reason for staging an annual premiership game in China was also clear: massive exposure on Chinese television. Back in Australia, the flow-on effect was also significant, an increase in club membership driven by members from Australia's Chinese population.
The power of sports diplomacy has been enormous. I think that was reflected in the 2018 game in Shanghai. Political relations between the two countries have been frosty, to say the least. For a politician to visit China, they must be invited by the Chinese government. Chinese government hadn't invited an Australian politician for the previous 11 months into China, but for our game, the Federal Trade Minister, the South Australian Premier and the Victorian Trade Minister were all offered invitations by the Chinese government. And in diplomatic circles, that was seen as an enormous olive branch by the Chinese to the Australian government to say, yes, we've had our differences, but hey, we have a strong partnership, we can get through those differences. And as a result, the CIIE Expo in Shanghai, we had the Foreign Minister invited, Trade Minister, State Premiers, but the ground was broken by the game in Shanghai. And so we're pretty proud of the role we're playing as a little working class AFL club out of South Australia in building those relations and playing a role in smoothing over any differences that may be there.
China is obviously the most or the largest export market for Australia by a long way. There's no Western country in the world that's more reliant on China as a percentage of exports. At the other end of the scale, Australia has a lot of products that China needs, is very open to trading with China, and it's obviously products are superior to a lot of other countries.
It's been fascinating to see business understanding that, hey, there might be short-term political spats, but business has got to go on. And the commitment to building a strong business relationship, even when political relationships are frosty, are incredibly important and are maintained. And that's been terrific to see. We thought that political frostiness may translate into a cooling of the business network between the two countries, and in fact it was quite the opposite, because business leaders said, well, we've got to step into the breach. While our politicians may be treating each other with disrespect, we've got to be even more respectful from a business point of view to keep the relationship going, because it's important for both countries.
Now, it's something that's really interesting in doing business in China versus doing business in Australia. If you look at a contract, there's all these negotiations that happen, and then you sign the contract and that's a done deal. Whereas in China, you sign the contract and that's when negotiations start. So it's quite interesting the way that different businesses, and that trips up a lot of foreign businesses, that they'll come in and they'll think they've got this, everything's locked in, but they need to be aware that things will continue to evolve and change. Expectations are likely to change with Chinese businesses. So just be aware that you need to be a little nimble and need to be a little accepting that sometimes a contract may not mean what you think it means.
Melbourne. Here at the home of the Australian Open, we met with Tennis Australia's CEO, Craig Tiley. We asked for his insights on Tennis Australia's longer-term experience of bridge building with China.
The great thing about tennis, it connects. It connects people. You actually don't have to speak the same language. There's a tennis court and you've got rackets and the ball. You all kind of know that is a language in itself. But it also allows people to socialise. And there's a side benefit to it. It's gender neutral, good for boys and girls, men and women, and good for exercise and long-term health benefits. It's got all these great values. So because of that, it's a great product to sell into sports diplomacy and to be able to go to the trade organizations, the business organizations. Invariably you'll find, and we found this particularly in China, everyone plays tennis in some form. And the political elite, the business elite, it's very much a sport of choice because it's got all those great benefits. So you connect immediately on that. And we've discovered we need to use that as a platform to have bigger conversations around how can governments work together, how can we partner from a business aspect that we can both benefit, both countries can benefit from that partnership, and what role can we play in connecting politicians, connecting business people, and tennis becomes a common language and a common connector, and we find that very often.
Cross-border bridge building is more than people-to-people though. It involves solid on-the-ground investment in China as well. Ben Slack, Tennis Australia's Head of International Business, explains.
Just recently, Tennis Australia has worked really closely with the city of Chengdu out in the western province of Sichuan. Tennis Australia and Chengdu have come together to run a tennis event called the One Belt, One Road University Championship presented by the Australian Open. 6 university teams from One Belt, One Road countries are coming into Chengdu to compete in a proper tournament. And effectively what that does is to use that as an opportunity between the countries to also talk about opportunities with the One Belt, One Road economic policy as well.
I think what excites me is just the magnitude of the possibility. I sometimes read what the politicians say or do, but they're sometimes on another wavelength. But from the people's point of view, from those people that want to engage in the sport and have a good, healthy lifestyle where they can socialise and meet friends, we've got a great connection, and that's the sport of tennis. We've come to found out like the real political elite in China, in the city government of Shanghai, of Beijing, and in the central government, a lot of them play tennis. And sometimes at home, somewhere. And I know because you start talking about tennis and the eyes just sparkle up. That's enough. It's it's an indication that that this is working. I think it's got a ways to go because, again, we are on the beginning of this journey and finding out how's the best way we can benefit from it. But sports diplomacy is an undervalued and underutilized opportunity for both China and Australia.
Brand Australia is so powerful in China, it is extraordinary. And I'll never forget a chat. I was having lunch with the Sport and Culture Minister in Shanghai, and I was asking him about what do kids play over Saturday morning? No, it's for set aside for tutoring. He said, so regular competition, except in schools, outside of schools, probably won't take off. He said, but if you have school holiday camps where it's an AFL camp and you promote the fact that it's Australian, it's healthy like Australia is, and only English will be spoken, he said Chinese mums will go, great, tick off the healthy, love Australia, be good for their English. That's how you get them involved. So it's those little things and little lessons that we've learnt along the way, which has been fabulous.
It's interesting. There's a lot of people that seem to want China to fail and want to knock it at the knees. And a lot of these people have probably done okay out of the growth of China. I think it's because China is so unknown for so many people and so alien for a lot of people that because it's different and they don't understand it, they'll get into that defensive mechanism and try and knock it down. A lot of the negative media is I think based on people or written by people that haven't spent a lot of time in China and don't know it too well. But they know the types of messages that sell papers and sell TV shows involve an element of China bashing. But some of the messaging is justified, and I do think that we can't be too naive and to see China through rose-tinted glasses. It is a completely different type of place, and we need to go in with as open mind as possible, but also with a positive view, because if you don't have a positive view of China, you really struggle to connect and really be successful in the market.
Whether it's wool or beef or wine or medical research or other professional services, those things are very important. But a partnership between the Central Government Ministry of Culture and my government is arguably just as important. That's how you get the Chen Long exhibition, 150 odd items out of the Palace Museum that had never left China before. Some of which, because of their size and shape, can't be hung in the Palace Museum. So they were getting seen by a brand new audience for the very first time. Things that have been locked away, absolute treasures. We sold out of programs on the first day. One of the most successful National Gallery of Victoria exhibitions in recent times. We've got partnerships with the ballet, Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. The list goes on and on. The cultural offering is just as important as trade because it is about reaffirming mutual understanding as the centrepiece of mutual trust and mutual benefit.
And it certainly generates a greater understanding between two nations when we can share culture together. Performing arts has also been absolutely flourishing between Australia and China. But more importantly, the two countries can actually connect and share a narrative together. The arts can actually be a very powerful medium for connection.
The Australian Ballet has a long association of culture exchange with China. This lengthy association has not only helped bridge divisions at times, but helps to connect sponsorship partners across borders. David McAllister is the Artistic Director of the Australian Ballet.
2018 was fantastic, and I guess 9 tours. It's the place that we've been to more than anywhere else in the world. I think we've done 8 tours to the UK, so we've now done 9 tours to China, which is, shows the importance of China to the Australian Ballet. And not only did we do the production live in Shanghai and Beijing, it was also broadcast on China TV. So it was amazing to have that exposure to, probably hundreds of thousands of people across China. And what was really great too was that we had Cheng Wu-guo, our beautiful principal dancer, dancing with his wife, Ako Kondo, in both Shanghai and Beijing in The Sleeping Beauty. So it was a really great personal tour for them as well.
I started training ballet when I was 10, and I had this opportunity to audition for Beijing Dance Academy. And I did, I went for it, and I got accepted to Beijing Dance Academy. So, yeah, because of my hometown is from Zhejiang, so I had to really leave home when I was 10. That was a big decision from my parents. So I went to Beijing Dance Academy, trained for 7 years, so up till I was 16 or 17, and I went to the Prix de Lausanne. And I won the second prize, which I could use the prize to choose a school to spend on. And I chose the Australian Ballet School. That's how I got here. I joined the company in 2008, and I was promoted to principal in 2012.
I think it's really interesting because Chen always says that, when he was in China, he learned how to do all the technical things that he finds, very easy. But what he does say is that he learned how to be an artist in Australia, and I think that's a really great thing that we share. I think, that there is things that we can do and there's things that they can do in Beijing that we really aimed for. And so this cross-combination is what makes this relationship so great, that we can learn from the training and the excitement of what Chinese dancers can do. What we've been really good at is developing, dance medicine and really being able to share all of the insights that we've learned through research and just through treatment in that area. And I know that's something that the Chinese ballet companies are very interested in.
We have a long history, and our relationships with us and Chinese ballet company very strong. And so now we have developed these exchange programs, which we have started this year, beginning of this year, with National Ballet of China. They have sent dancers to here to learn what we do, and then in the future we'll send our dancers back to China and to learn what they do. Yeah, it's perfect for both companies.
Chinese markets had a rapid growth over the last 10 years. When I first started working in Chinese film production, the market was about 4.3 billion renminbi. There are 3,000 screens, and they were opening about 3 screens a day. 10 years later, last year, the market had grown to almost 61 billion renminbi, and there are over 50,000 screens with 15 screens opening a day. I first met Bill Kong in about 2010, and he's been extremely successful these last 25, 30 years. He produced Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Bill came to us in late 2017 and said, I've got this film, I think I want to make it in Australia. It's called The Whistleblower. And we said, hey, you know what? This could fit under the China-Australia co-production treaty.
A lot of people don't know, but Australia and China actually has a film tax treaty where you can offset 40% of your co-production costs against your tax.
The great thing about these treaties is these treaties are about fostering cultural trade between Australia and China. And the crux of that is that you have Chinese nationals and Australian nationals in all the key roles. But the reality is that it brings Australian and Chinese film professionals together, exchanges ideas. They learn of each other. As I said before, we had an Australian DOP who doesn't speak Mandarin. We had a Chinese director who understands a bit of English but doesn't speak English confidently. And they just gelled as one. And it was a great exchange across the board.
The Whistleblower is the largest China-Australia co-production ever produced in Australia. And with a budget of $50 million, it's also the largest production out of Victoria since HBO's The Pacific in 2008. Around 85% of The Whistleblower was shot locally with a Chinese and Australian crew.
The Whistleblower is a classic white-collar crime. There's a romance within it, but it's a contemporary film for today, for the Chinese markets, half Mandarin, half English, It'll be distributed in Australia by Roadshow, but its main marketplace is going to be China. So the impact on the Victorian film industry has been fantastic. The film was brought in well under budget, and the big advantage, I think, in the future is that as a result of this, my partner and I want to do more Chinese films in Australia. There's a real hunger now to come down to Australia to do more and more films of this sort of scale.
I think Australia is really, it's been since 1972, it's recognised the People's Republic of China as an official country, so there's a lot of history there. Australia was one of the first countries to really trade en masse with China, particularly those pioneers that were trading the iron ore and some of the other commodities. And you also have a large population of Chinese here. No other country outside of Asia has a higher per capita population of Chinese people. So I think Australians in general understand Chinese a little more than other Western countries. So it is well placed to ride some of those challenges, geopolitical challenges, that face not only Australia but almost every country on the planet. There's always going to be issues with.
So we have as much to learn as we have to teach. We have as much to gain as we have to give.
And it's been fantastic. And politically, it's been just to see the two countries using us to build those bridges almost as a back channel behind the hard-nosed political focus has been really rewarding.